When talking about Europe, people usually gravitate towards the main powers such as France, Germany, and the United Kingdom. With that being said, many smaller countries that have rich histories and unique traits take the back seat to some of these top dogs. One of these countries is Switzerland. When people hear about Switzerland, they usually think of skiing and clocks, but today we'll be exploring Switzerland's lesser-known intricacies. In this video, we will be looking at their neutral history, unique direct democracy, and other things that I find remarkable about this European gem. This is everything you need to know about Switzerland. Let's start with the basics. Switzerland is a country in Central Europe bordered by Germany to the north, Austria to the east, Italy to the south, and France and Liechtenstein to the west. The country has no official capital, but the de facto capital is Bern. Switzerland is separated into 20 cantons and 6 half-cantons, which are basically Swiss provinces. Each canton has its own parliament and constitution, which makes each canton basically its own mini-state inside of Switzerland. The country is situated right smack in the middle of the Alps mountain range. For this region, about 60% of Switzerland's area is comprised of mountainous regions. Due to the difficult living conditions in mountains, the majority of the Swiss population lives in the northern region of Switzerland called the Swiss Plateau. This area is comprised of plains and hills which offer a more livable condition for the masses. This is an observable phenomenon when looking at a map of Switzerland. As you can clearly see, the 3 main cities of Zurich, Geneva, and Bern are all located north of the Alps, with very few cities being in the southern portion of the country. Anyways, because of Switzerland being a relatively small European country and only 30% of that land being practical to live in, the country only has a meager 8.1 million people. Now, although that may seem like a fairly small number for a country, Switzerland's small population does allow the country to lead in many different fields. For instance, they have the second highest nominal GDP per capita at $84,000, which is crazy when you consider that the first country in the list is Luxembourg that only has 500,000 people, compared to Switzerland's 8.1 million. To return to demographics, Switzerland has 4 official languages: German, French, Italian, and Romance, although more than 80% of the population speaks German or French. Many of you might have never heard of Romance, and I certainly didn't either before doing research for this video. Romance is a local dialect primarily spoken in the southeastern canton of Graubünden. Now, although only 0.5% of the Swiss population speaks Romance, it is still constitutionally obliged to be a national language, although many cantons opt out to include their legislator in Romance language. Anyways, with that all being said, Switzerland prides itself on its diversity, with the more French culture in the east, German culture in the north, Italian culture to the south, and isolated Romance culture in the Graubünden canton. Religion is also very prevalent in Switzerland, with 38% of Swiss people identifying as Roman Catholic and 27% identifying as Reformed. Only 21% of the Swiss populace identifies as agnostic or atheist, but 56% of Swiss people don't believe that religion is important. Now that we have covered demographics, let's look at Switzerland's history, which will hopefully answer the question as to why they are one of the only truly neutral countries in the world. I will skip all the really old stuff because I don't feel like it is really pertinent to what this video is about. Now, I know what you're thinking. This is supposed to be everything you need to know about Switzerland, so don't I need to know this stuff? My answer to that is, I don't really think so. The Switzerland we know today is not really the same Switzerland that was around 2,000 years ago. I think we can skip over all the Roman and Dark Ages stuff to just go straight to the Middle Ages when Switzerland truly became a state as we know it today. So the story of independent Switzerland starts in the year of 1291 between 3 small autonomous states which were all in the modern area of Switzerland. I say the beginning of independent Switzerland because before that they were under Roman rule and then Frankish rule and finally under Holy Roman rule, so they weren't truly autonomous. The 3 original duchies were Uri, Schwyz, and Unterwalden, which are to this day still 3 cantons in Switzerland. These 3 states signed the Federal Charter of 1291, which solidified peace between them. This is considered to be Switzerland's founding document, even though it was not officially creating the state of Switzerland, and there were surely treaties and agreements signed before between these 3 districts. Anyways, after about 60 years of peace and prosperity, the original 3 decided to include 5 more neighbors into their ménage à trois to create the Old Confederacy, which would last until the 1500s. Even though the Confederacy only lasted until the 1500s, the cantons each had sovereignty until the French Revolution. Now, just to illustrate what the Swiss Confederacy looked like at the time, let's look at a couple of maps. The first is the local map of Switzerland at the time, which really does not show what it looked like on the bigger scale, but we can clearly see the cantons which are still present to this day and generally occupy the same area. The second map is from your atlas, and I found this map a lot more interesting because it shows what the world looked like in 1500 and where Switzerland was at the time, in the red outline. Looking at this outline and comparing it to what Switzerland looks like now, we can see that Switzerland hasn't changed much in the past 500 years. Now, at this time, the Swiss were not completely neutral yet, and the mercenaries of the Confederacy were seen as nearly invisible since the country had grown so rapidly through wars. Anyways, between this time and the French Revolution, there were many revolts, wars, treaties, and most importantly, a Reformation movement of the Catholic religion that actually started in Switzerland. Now, these things are all interesting, but not really pertinent to the video. If we want to get to the really important stuff, we need to get to 1798, where France, who had recently become a republic and was feeling very mighty, decided to invade Switzerland. Switzerland sadly stood no chance against their powerful French neighbor. After winning the war, France left Switzerland as a vassal, but centralized their government by abolishing the cantonal system they had been using for nearly 4 centuries. France also took a few Swiss cities, such as Mulhausen, for their own, which they still own to this day. Now, although Switzerland was a vassal to France, they were not very loyal subjects. I mean, would you really be after being invaded and getting your traditional governmental type crushed by the French? I certainly know I wouldn't. So when in 1803 the Napoleonic coalition struck against France for their warmongering behavior, Switzerland refused to fight alongside them, even though they were a vassal and were pretty much obliged to. Instead of acting violently, though, Napoleon and his government had many negotiations with the Swiss government, which finally ended with the Act of Mediation